It was supposed to be the day my life changed, the day I finally got a seat at the table. Instead, it became the day I found out how worthless I was to my own family. They got the mansions, the trust funds, the yachts, and I got a rusted metal toolbox. If you've ever felt invisible to the people who are supposed to see you most, this story is for you. Hit that comment button and tell me what was the last thing you were given that made you feel like you were nothing. Don't be shy. Let me know. And if you've ever wanted to see a nobody prove everyone wrong and win it all, make sure to subscribe. You don't want to miss what happens next. The real story behind how my cousins took $65 million and I got a toolbox is one you'll never see coming. I'm Aiden, 31 years old, a carpenter by trade. My hands are calloused, and my back aches at the end of every day. But I've always been proud of the life I've built. It's a simple life, sure, but it's mine. My small home in the suburbs is filled with the scent of sawdust and fresh-cut pine, and it's always been my safe haven. My mom, Mara, has lived with me since her health started to fade. She's my rock, the one person in my life who has always believed in me, no matter what. After my dad passed, I dedicated myself to her. I took on extra jobs, worked weekends, did whatever it took to keep us afloat, to keep her comfortable. She deserved it. It was a promise I made to myself and to my father's memory. But then, Uncle Franklin died. He wasn't just an uncle. He was a force of nature, a man who built a real estate empire from nothing, buying up land and turning it into gold. To the outside world, he was a legend, a self-made man. To us, his family, he was complicated. He was a quiet man, but his presence was always loud. He watched, he listened, and he never missed a thing. I always admired him from afar, hopeful that maybe he saw something in me, some shared work ethic, some understanding of what it meant to build something from the ground up. My cousins, Chad and Brittany, didn't have to hope. They just knew. They walked into the lawyer's office that day with a sense of entitlement that was so thick you could taste it in the air. Chad, with his designer suit and a smirk that was permanently etched onto his face. Brittany, in a dress that probably cost more than my pickup truck, her eyes gleaming with a mix of anticipation and condescension. They were the family's golden children, the ones who had been handed everything on a silver platter since birth. They believed they were entitled to Uncle Franklin's legacy. They were right about some things. The lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Mr. Thorne, cleared his throat and began to read the will. My heart was a drum in my chest, a foolish, hopeful sound. He started with the charities, a long list of foundations Uncle Franklin had supported. Then, he got to the family. Chad was first. He inherited the lakefront mansion in Tahoe, a collection of vintage cars, and a massive trust fund. Chad's smirk turned into a full-blown, ear-to-ear grin. He leaned over and whispered to Brittany, loud enough for me to hear. Just as I expected. I knew Uncle Franklin would do the right thing. Next was Brittany. She received the private yacht, a penthouse in Manhattan, and a business portfolio that would set her up for life. She let out a small, breathless laugh, a sound that grated on my nerves. She glanced at me and gave a polite, practiced smile. I knew what it meant. See, Aiden, this is what success looks like. Then, Mr. Thorne got to my name. I sat up straighter, my hands clasped in my lap. For a moment, my mind went to Mom, to how this could change everything for us. Maybe just a small piece of land, enough to give her some security. But what I heard next shattered every bit of that hope. To my nephew, Aiden, I leave one old metal toolbox, contents unknown. Silence, for a long, painful second. There was nothing. Then, a sharp, cutting laugh from Chad. He leaned forward and, in a voice dripping with mockery, said, "Figures. The loser gets the junk," Brittany added, her voice sugary sweet. "I guess Uncle Franklin thought you'd be more comfortable with trash than with a treasure." Everyone else in the room either chuckled or looked away, as if this was some kind of elaborate joke at my expense. My face burned with humiliation, a hot, stinging sensation that crept up my neck. I wanted to disappear, to sink right through the floorboards of that elegant office. I stood up slowly and took the toolbox. It was heavy, and the weight of it felt like a slap in the face. It was dented and rusty, a piece of scrap metal that looked like it had been through a war. I held it tightly, my knuckles white, trying to hide the shaking of my hands. I couldn't look at my cousins. I just nodded at Mr. Thorne and walked out, clutching that worthless box. It felt like every step I took echoed their laughter. I could hear their whispers behind me as I left. I heard Chad say, "Can you believe it? He actually got a toolbox." It was a cruel, public humiliation. They got the vast majority of the fortune, and all I got was a piece of junk. They had every right to laugh. Or so I thought. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that the story of how my cousins took $65 million, and I got a toolbox was about to take a turn none of us could have ever predicted. The walk out of that lawyer's office felt like I was moving in slow motion. The polite nods from Mr. Thorne, the silent, sympathetic gazes from the secretaries who knew a raw deal when they saw one. It all felt like a movie, and I was the humiliated star of a tragic comedy. The polished hardwood floors, the ornate grandfather clock in the hall, the quiet luxury of the place. It all just amplified the sound of my cousin's laughter echoing in my head. I got to my truck, a beat-up Ford F-150 that I've had since I was 20, the paint chipped and faded from a decade of hard work. It was a stark contrast to Chad's brand-new jet-black Range Rover and Brittany's sleek Mercedes convertible. As I fumbled with the key, a wave of pure, unfiltered shame washed over me. I'm not a fancy guy, never have been, but standing there, clutching a rusty toolbox while my cousins drove away in their luxury cars, I'd never felt so poor, so small, so completely invisible. I could still hear Chad's voice, a smug, low sneer. "The loser gets the junk." It wasn't just a comment, it was a verdict. It was the final, official stamp on my place in the family. I threw the toolbox into the passenger seat with a thud that shook the whole cab. The metal clanged against the plastic dashboard, a hollow, pathetic sound. I didn't even bother to close the door. I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel, the leather worn smooth and comforting under my calloused palms. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not for them. Never for them. All the years of hard work, of putting in the hours, of taking care of my mom. Was it all for nothing? I'd always thought my self-worth came from my character, from my actions. But in that moment, in that parking lot, surrounded by the evidence of my cousin's ridiculous wealth, my character felt like a lie, like a cheap consolation prize. The drive home was a blur. My mind replayed the scene at the lawyer's office over and over, each time more painful than the last. That look in Brittany's eyes, a mix of pity and contempt, like she couldn't believe I was even in the same room as them. She was always like that, the family princess, the one who never had to lift a finger, whose entire life was a meticulously curated highlight reel on social media. She always looked at me as if my hands, dirty from honest work, were a sign of some moral failing. Like hard work was for suckers, and real winners were born into it. I pulled up to my small house, and the sight of it felt both comforting and like a cage. It was everything I had, but it was also a painful reminder of everything I didn't. The lawn wasn't perfectly manicured like Chad's. The paint on the front door was peeling, but it was home. And my mom, Mara, was inside. She was my rock. The one person who saw my worth not in my bank account, but in my heart. When I walked through the door, she was sitting in her favorite armchair, a book in her lap. The sight of her frail hands and the gentle smile she gave me made my throat tighten. She didn't even have to ask what happened. The moment she saw the toolbox in my hands, she just knew. She saw the defeat in my eyes, a weight I hadn't known how to carry. I set the box on the kitchen table with a heavy thud, the noise louder than it should have been in the small, quiet room. Just this. "Mom," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "This is all he left me." She didn't say anything for a long time. She just looked at the toolbox, then at me. Her eyes, filled with a wisdom I could only hope to one day possess, saw right through the humiliation. "Don't be ashamed, Aiden," she said softly, her voice the calmest thing in the world. Sometimes the smallest gifts carry the greatest meaning. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But my mind was already racing back, replaying a lifetime of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family. I remember being a kid. We'd go to Uncle Franklin's house for Christmas. It was always a big deal. Chad and Brittany would get these extravagant gifts. A brand new bike for Brittany with a big bow on it, a remote-controlled plane for Chad that probably cost more than my dad's car payment. And me Uncle Franklin would walk over, pat me on the back, and tell me I was a good boy. He'd hand me a small envelope with a $20 bill inside. The words were always the same. "For your hard work, Aiden." Even then, I knew it was different. Even then, the gift felt less like a reward and more like a sign of my lower status. The same way my cousins took $65 million, and I got a toolbox. The message was clear: they were destined for greatness, and I was just destined to be a worker. A laborer. That's how it was with everything. When my dad died, my mom and I were lost. She was sick, and I was just a kid. But I knew I had to step up. I got a job at the local hardware store and dropped out of community college. My dreams of getting an engineering degree, of building something important, were put on hold. My cousins. They didn't even show up for my dad's funeral. They were too busy on a ski trip. They sent a sympathy card, but it was just as empty and cold as they were. I never held it against them. Not really. I just knew we were different. I knew our worlds would never really intersect. And when I had to take out loans to cover my mom's medical bills, I never once thought to ask them for help. The thought itself was laughable. They'd just look at me with that same mix of pity and condescension. They always had a way of making me feel like my struggle was some sort of personal failure, like my work was a sign of my lack of ambition, not proof of my loyalty. And the toolbox was the final, irrefutable proof to them that their worldview was correct. Chad and Brittany were always at the front of the line, taking what they wanted. I was always at the back, just trying to survive. The weight of that toolbox on my kitchen table wasn't just physical. It was the weight of a lifetime of being an afterthought, the weight of a history of being treated like I was nothing. And as I sat there, staring at it, my mom's words echoing in my mind, I started to feel something new. Not just humiliation, not just anger, but a flicker of something else, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Curiosity, something about that box, and the way Uncle Franklin's voice had sounded in the recording. It didn't feel like a joke. It felt like something more, and I was determined to find out what it was. My mom's words stayed with me long after she went to bed. Sometimes the smallest gifts carry the greatest meaning. It was a nice thought, a sweet thought, but my brain, my bruised ego, kept replaying Chad's smug face, Brittany's condescending smirk, meaning, what meaning could a beat-up, rusty toolbox possibly hold? It was junk. It was an insult, a final, cruel reminder from my uncle that I wasn't worth anything more than a few wrenches and a hammer. Still, her faith had planted a seed of doubt in my mind, a tiny little sprout of curiosity. I walked back to the kitchen table, the darkness of the room broken only by the dim light over the stove. I stood there, just staring at the toolbox. It was old, the kind of old where the metal was worn smooth in some places and had sharp, pitted rust in others. A faint smell of oil and stale metal hung in the air around it. I ran my hands over the cold surface, tracing the faded words, "Property of F. Holloway," that were stenciled on the side. "Franklin. Uncle Franklin." I lifted the box. It was heavy, heavier than it had any right to be, and the weight felt off. It wasn't balanced. It felt dense at the bottom, like something was pressing down from underneath. I grabbed a flashlight and knelt, turning the box over. The bottom looked normal enough, a flat piece of steel, riveted on all four sides. But then I noticed it. The rivets on the corners weren't quite right. They were a little too smooth, a little too precise, like they hadn't been put on by a machine. My heart started to beat a little faster. I went to my own toolbox in the shed, the one I actually used, and grabbed a small flathead screwdriver. Back at the kitchen table, I carefully wedged the tip of the screwdriver into the edge of the bottom panel. I had to force it. The metal squealed in protest, but I kept pushing. My breath held. With a final pop, a small section gave way. I pried at it with my fingers, and the entire panel began to lift. Inside, hidden beneath the thin metal sheet, was no gold or diamonds, not a stack of cash, just a small, unassuming black box. I pulled it out, my hands trembling. It was wrapped in a protective, vacuum-sealed bag. I tore it open. Inside, nestled in a foam cutout, was a single, small, dusty USB drive. My heart sank a little. A USB drive. After all that, it was just a piece of tech. Was this some kind of prank? A final twist of the knife, I took it to my desk, the old rickety thing I had built myself a few years back. My computer was nothing special, an ancient laptop I'd fixed up a few times. It hummed to life slowly, the sound of the old fan whirring to get going. I plugged the USB into the side. The light on the drive blinked a few times, then stayed solid. A new folder popped up on the desktop, titled, simply, Aiden. My hands shook as I clicked on it. Inside was one file legacy_message, MP4. I double-clicked, and a video window opened. The screen was dark for a second. Then a face I knew so well, a face I had always looked up to, appeared. Uncle Franklin. He was sitting in a leather chair, in a room that looked like a library, and he was staring straight into the camera, his eyes meeting mine. His voice was calm, deliberate. Not a hint of the playful, mocking tone I'd expected. "Aiden," he said, and I swear, I felt it in my bones. "If you are watching this, then it means you did not give up. It means you saw beyond the contempt, the others. They could not have. I gave them what they wanted. Mansions, yachts, money. That's the easy part. That's the kind of money that attracts the kind of people who think they deserve everything. The kind of people who are not builders, but takers." He paused, and the camera zoomed in a little. His eyes seemed to bore into my soul. "I watched you, Aiden. I watched you since you were a boy. I watched you take care of your mother when no one else would. I saw you put your dreams aside to make sure she was okay. I saw the calluses on your hands and the quiet pride in your eyes. I saw your loyalty, your humility, and your willingness to work for something real." My throat tightened. A sudden rush of emotion made my eyes burn. This wasn't a joke. This was him, the real him. He hadn't forgotten me. He'd been watching. "I left the mansions and the $65 million to Chad and Brittany for a reason," he continued. "That money, the flashy cars, the houses, They'll be consumed by it. They'll spend it all on things to prove they're worth something, and they'll lose themselves in the process. It's not a gift, Aiden. It's a test they will fail. The toolbox I left you. That was the true inheritance. It was meant to be the first key. Because the true treasure is not money. It's what you build. I left them the fish. I left you the ocean. I couldn't breathe. My mind was racing, trying to catch up with his words. The humiliation, the anger, the shame. All of it started to crumble, replaced by a feeling I couldn't even name. Hope, relief, validation. He saw me. He actually saw me. The real legacy. Aiden, Uncle Franklin said, his voice dropping slightly, is in here. The video cut to a close-up of a locked safe. It's a network of investments, a blueprint for a different kind of fortune, one that doesn't just sit in a bank account, but one that grows, one that makes a real difference. I've designed a series of tasks, a puzzle. Each clue will lead you to the next. The first clue is this. The code to unlock my secret online vault is the same as the one on the combination lock on my old filing cabinet in the shed. The one you used to get to your toolbox. You'll have to remember. Don't write it down. Just remember. If you can remember that, then you're ready for the first step. The video ended, and my computer screen went black. I sat there, stunned. It wasn't a joke. It was a test. A test I had already passed. He didn't just give me the tools. He gave me the reason to use them. For a lifetime. I'd felt like an outsider, a nobody. But Uncle Franklin's voice, coming from that screen, made me feel like the most important man in the world. He hadn't given me money. He had given me something so much more valuable. He had given me a chance to prove that the story of how my cousins took $65 million and I got a toolbox was only the beginning. The first task was simple, almost too simple. It felt like a riddle from a children's book. The code to unlock my secret online vault is the same as the one on the combination lock on my old filing cabinet in the shed, the one you used to get to your toolbox. I stared at the screen, a sudden wave of confusion washing over me. There was no shed. There was no filing cabinet. Uncle Franklin's old workshop had been torn down years ago. I thought back to the lawyer's office, to the moment I'd been handed the toolbox. I'd never been to a shed. But then, a flicker of memory. A small, locked box. One of Uncle Franklin's many treasures. Sitting on his desk. He'd shown it to me once when I was a kid. He'd never told me what was inside, just that the code was a simple one. Something only I would know. A date. My mom's birthday. A number that would never change. I pulled out my phone and entered the number. A new screen popped up. It was a digital map, with a single blinking red dot on it. I zoomed in. The dot was in an old industrial part of town, a rundown area with warehouses and storage facilities. It was a part of the city I knew well. The kind of place people go to hide things, or to find things. The kind of place my cousins would never dream of setting foot in. A rush of adrenaline shot through me. I didn't waste another second. I got up, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door. My mom was asleep. The sound of her gentle breathing a familiar comfort. I didn't want to wake her. She would worry. She deserved to sleep peacefully. The thought of her, the quiet strength she had always shown me, gave me a new kind of courage. I wasn't doing this for me anymore. I was doing this for us. The drive was quiet. The streets were empty. The city lights were a dull blur in the distance. The old F-150 rumbled to life. The familiar sound of the engine a reassurance. It was just me and my truck against the world. I gripped the wheel tightly, my hands sweating a little. My mind was racing, trying to put the pieces together. The toolbox, the USB, the map, the riddle. It was all a game. A dangerous game. But I was playing it. I finally pulled up to the storage facility. It was a massive, desolate lot with row after row of metal doors. The air smelled of dust and rust, and a few dim yellow lights hummed overhead. It felt like a ghost town. I shivered. Not from the cold, but from the sense of unease that hung in the air. The map on my phone was still blinking. It was pointing to a specific unit. Unit 17. The same number that was on the filing cabinet in Uncle Franklin's will. The same number that was on my mom's birthday card. It was a new kind of code. A secret language only I understood. I walked to the unit, my footsteps echoing on the gravel. The padlock on the door was heavy duty. A beast of a thing. A small keypad was attached to the door. I entered the code, my fingers trembling slightly. The numbers clicked into place with a soft beep. The lock released with a heavy clank. I pulled the door upward, and the sound of the metal rolling back seemed to shake the whole row. Inside, the air smelled faintly of sawdust and old paper. It wasn't an empty unit. It was a workshop. Shelves were filled with old blueprints and schematics, and a small desk sat in the middle of the room. On it was an old laptop, and a single, leather-bound journal. The journal was open, and a single page was filled with Uncle Franklin's familiar handwriting. I was in the right place. My hands shook as I reached for the journal. This was it. The real inheritance. The real story. The one that was worth more than money. The one that was all mine. But then, I heard it. The faint hum of an engine. My heart stopped. I froze. My eyes wide, my mind screaming. I am not alone. Headlights swept across the rows of storage units, and my stomach dropped. I ducked behind a stack of boxes, my heart pounding in my ears. The headlights got closer, then stopped. A car door slammed shut. I peeked out from behind the boxes, my body tense, every muscle screaming at me to run. It was Chad's Range Rover. I could see him and Brittany getting out. They were both on their phones, their faces a mix of suspicion and greed. "I knew it," Chad said, his voice loud and rough, echoing in the quiet night. "I knew he was hiding something. He's been acting too quiet. I told you." "Chad," Brittany said, her voice dripping with venom. "He wouldn't just take that box. He's a liar, a thief. He's probably hiding something that's worth more than the whole estate." My heart raced as I watched them. They were looking at me, or at least in my direction. They were trying to find me. They knew I was here. I reached for the phone in my pocket, my mind racing. What do I do? What do I do? "Aiden," Chad's voice boomed. "I know you're in there. You pathetic liar. Open up. Let me see what you've got." I didn't move. I stayed hidden, my body pressed against the cold metal of the boxes. I could hear their footsteps getting closer, their voices growing louder. Chad was trying to open the door, but it was locked. He was pounding on it, his fists making a loud, booming sound. "Aiden, you idiot. We're your family. What are you doing?" I took a deep breath. I felt a new kind of power surge through me. The old me, the one who was always scared, the one who was always a step behind, would have panicked. He would have given in. But not anymore. Not now. I wasn't just Aiden anymore. I was the one Uncle Franklin had trusted. I stood up slowly, stepping out from behind the boxes. Chad and Brittany stopped. They stared at me, their faces a mix of shock and rage. "I'm not in here, Chad," I said, my voice calm, steady, and in control. "I'm not in here. I'm right here." Chad glared at me, his eyes filled with a raw, burning anger. "You're lying," he said, his voice a low growl. "You're hiding something. We know it. What did Franklin really leave you?" I met his gaze, something inside me shifting. For the first time, I didn't feel smaller than him. I felt stronger. I had something they would never have. I had a secret, a purpose. "Uncle Franklin left me exactly what I needed," I said, my voice firm. That's all you need to know. I got back into my truck, started the engine, and looked at them one last time. They were standing there, under the harsh lights of the storage facility, their fists clenched, their faces red with rage. Their perfect lives, their perfect little world, was unraveling right in front of them, and they had no one to blame but themselves. I pulled out of the facility, leaving them standing there, and a sense of certainty surged through me. My life had changed, and it was all because of a stupid toolbox. I don't know how long I sat there, parked at the end of the street, watching Chad and Brittany's cars shrink in my rearview mirror. My heart was still pounding like a drum, a wild, frantic beat in my chest. But it wasn't out of fear. It was out of a pure, unadulterated rush. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control. They were the ones left in the dark, screaming into the empty night. And I was the one with the secret. I waited another 10 minutes, just to be sure. When the street was silent again, I drove my truck back to the storage facility, my hands gripping the wheel with a fierce determination I didn't even know I had. I parked the truck and got out, my feet crunching on the gravel. The air felt different now. The place didn't feel desolate and empty anymore. It felt like a vault. My vault. I walked back to Unit 17, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I entered the code again, the numbers clicking into place with a satisfying beep. The lock clanked open, and I slid the heavy metal door upward. The air inside felt cool and still. I was alone, truly alone. And this time, I wasn't afraid. I walked to the safe, a massive, imposing thing made of steel. The combination lock on the door was old, but the gears clicked smoothly as I entered the code Uncle Franklin had given me. A solid click, then a soft hum. The heavy door swung open. I took a deep breath, ready for something. Ready for gold bars. Ready for stacks of money. Ready for the treasure my cousins believed they were entitled to. What I saw inside wasn't what I expected. No piles of cash. No shining gold. Instead, the safe was filled with neatly organized files, a series of thick, leather-bound journals, and a small, antique-looking ledger. I felt a wave of confusion wash over me, followed by a sudden, sinking disappointment. Was this it? Was this the great inheritance? A bunch of old papers? Then, I saw a final letter, a note from Uncle Franklin, tucked into the front of the ledger. I pulled it out and read it. His handwriting familiar, steady. If you're reading this, Aiden, you have already proven your worth. They sought treasure in a rusty box. You found a key. My greatest legacy is not the money I made, but the lessons I learned. My legacy is in these journals, in these files. Use them to build something that lasts. I chose you, not for what you have, but for who you are. Do not squander this. It is your inheritance. I sat down hard on the concrete floor, my legs suddenly weak. He hadn't given me money. He had given me a business. A real, working, living, breathing business. The journals were filled with his thoughts, his strategies, his mistakes, and his triumphs. He had documented everything. His philosophy on land development, his tactics for buying up properties no one else wanted, his network of trusted associates. It wasn't a blueprint. It was a mentorship. I spent the next few weeks living out of that storage unit. I'd go in every night after my mom was asleep, my mind on fire. I devoured every word in those journals. I learned about silent partnerships, about building a brand, about the power of relationships. I learned about the kind of man Uncle Franklin was, the one my family never saw. He was meticulous. He was disciplined. He was brilliant. I saw his failures, too. The projects that went south. The partners who betrayed him. He wrote about them all, not with anger, but with a quiet sense of reflection. He had entrusted me with all of it, not just his success, but his story. The more I read, the more I understood. The mansions, the cars, the money. That was all a distraction. The real inheritance was in here. It was the knowledge, the blueprint, the code, and the trust. I started small. I used the information in the ledger to access a series of encrypted accounts. They weren't giant numbers. Not at first. But they were enough. I went to the bank and pulled out enough cash to pay off all of my mom's medical bills. All of them. I brought the bills home and laid them on her bed. A stack of white paper, all marked, paid in full. When she saw them, she just stared, her eyes welling up with tears. She didn't ask where the money came from. She just hugged me. And in that moment, all the years of struggle, all the years of sacrifice, felt worth it. I also started to give back to the community. Just like Uncle Franklin had in his journals, I made an anonymous donation to the local church, the one that had helped us with groceries when my dad first passed. I funded a new scholarship for kids at the high school, kids who wanted to go to trade school, just like I had once dreamed of doing. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because it felt right. It felt like what Uncle Franklin would have wanted. Meanwhile, I could feel the heat from my cousins. I got a text from Chad, a single line dripping with a bitter kind of curiosity. "What did you find in that box?" "Aiden." I didn't reply. Brittany called me a few days later, her voice a little too sweet, a little too kind. "You've been so quiet. Aiden, don't tell me you actually believed Silas had a secret for you." I looked at the toolbox, still sitting on my kitchen table, a reminder of everything I'd been through. I picked up the phone. "I know the truth." "Brittany," I said, my voice calm, steady, and in control. And that's all I need. The humiliation I had felt on that day at the lawyer's office was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet sense of triumph. Chad and Brittany had their $65 million, their mansions, their fancy cars, but they were still empty. They were still looking for something, for some kind of validation. They were still playing a game that was rigged against them. I, on the other hand, had found my purpose. The toolbox had been a key, the USB a map, and the journals a treasure trove of wisdom and responsibility. My inheritance wasn't money. It was trust. And that has changed everything. After I left the storage unit, a quiet calm settled over me. It was strange, like I was moving through the world with a new kind of skin. I still worked my job as a carpenter, my hands still got dusty and calloused. But now, every swing of the hammer felt different. Every piece of wood I cut felt like a building block for something more. My truck still rumbled, but the sound of the engine was no longer a symbol of my struggle. It was the sound of my independence. My mom noticed it right away. She'd look at me as I read Uncle Franklin's journals late at night, a quiet smile on her face. She never asked what was in them, but she knew. She saw the new light in my eyes, the purpose in my step. She saw me become a man who was no longer haunted by his past, but defined by his future. Meanwhile, my cousins were in a free fall. The silence from me was driving them crazy. They'd post pictures online of their lavish parties, their new cars, but it all looked desperate, forced. They were trying to convince the world, and each other, that they were living their best lives. But they couldn't. Not when they didn't know what I had. The calls and texts started to get more aggressive. Chad's messages would come in late at night. Just a few words. "What did you find?" Or, "Don't lie to me." Brittany's calls were worse. She'd pretend to check on my mom, her voice sickeningly sweet. But it would always end with the same question. "Aiden, honey, you know you can tell me anything." "I'm family." I never answered. I never caved. I just let their frustrations simmer. knowing that it was eating them alive. Their money was a game. My life was real, and they couldn't stand it. And then, one Saturday morning, they showed up, unannounced. I was outside, getting my tools out of the truck, when a sleek black Range Rover pulled into my driveway, followed by a bright red convertible. The engines purred with a sound that felt out of place on my quiet suburban street. Chad and Brittany got out, and they looked different. Their perfect clothes were a little wrinkled. Their faces were pale. Their eyes were shadowed. They looked tired. They looked desperate. "Aiden," Chad said, his voice a low growl. "We need to talk." I just stood there, holding a hammer, my hands dirty with honest work. I didn't invite them in. I didn't have to. This was my home, my space, and I was in control about what I asked, my voice calm. The lack of emotion on my face was a new weapon. It disarmed them. It infuriated them. "You know what?" Brittany said, her voice sharp with a mix of fear and anger. "Don't play stupid. Aiden, what did Uncle Franklin really leave you? What was in that toolbox?" I looked at them, at their expensive clothes, at their agitated faces. I felt a wave of pity, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of clarity. They weren't my family. They were strangers. They were a part of my past that I was ready to close the door on. "He left me a toolbox. Brittany," I said, "and I left you two in the parking lot. That's all there is to know." Chad took a step forward, his fists clenched. "You're a liar. I know you're hiding something. We heard you're paying off your mom's medical bills. Where did that money come from? Aiden, you can't afford that." I just looked at him, my expression blank. "That money came from hard work, Chad. Something you know nothing about." He lunged at me, his face red with rage, but Brittany held him back. "Chad." "No," she hissed. "This is his game. He's trying to goad you." Brittany turned to me, her voice softening. A final, desperate attempt at manipulation. "Aiden, please. We're family. We can help each other. We can figure this out together. You just have to tell us what he gave you." I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt nothing. No anger. No shame. Just nothing. I looked at the hammer in my hand, at the calluses on my palms, at my simple home behind me. I had everything I needed. They had nothing. He didn't leave me money. "Brittany," I said, my voice quiet, but firm. "He left me something you and Chad will never understand. He left me trust, and with that, he set me free." Chad let out a roar of frustration. He wrenched his arm out of Brittany's grasp and stormed back to his car. Brittany gave me one last, cold stare, then followed him. I watched them drive away, their expensive cars disappearing down the road. They were lost. They had everything and nothing, and I, with my rusty toolbox, had found my freedom. My life was finally my own. I watched their cars disappear down the road, and the silence that was left behind was the most peaceful thing I had ever heard. The anger was gone. The humiliation was gone. The bitter sting of a lifetime of being overlooked. It had all just vanished. I wasn't a loser anymore. I wasn't an outcast. I was just Aiden, a man standing in front of his home, feeling more free than I had ever felt in my life. The fear I had lived with for so long, the fear of being seen as a failure, was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, unshakable confidence. The weeks turned into months. The blueprint Uncle Franklin had left me, his meticulously crafted plan, became a part of my daily life. I was still a carpenter, but now, my work was different. I bought a few small properties that no one else wanted, the kind of places people just saw as worthless, and I fixed them up myself. I used the money from the investments to buy the materials, and I used the lessons from Uncle Franklin's journals to make smart decisions. I didn't hire a crew. I did it all with my own 2 hands, just like I had always done. It was about building, not just buying. I got my mom a new place, a small, beautiful little house not too far from mine. It had a big front porch and a little garden where she could grow her flowers. She still comes over to my place for dinner almost every night. I never told her the full story, but she knows. She sees the change in me. She sees that I'm happy, and that's all that matters to her. I haven't talked to Chad or Brittany since that day. I've seen them, though. In a magazine a few months ago, I saw a picture of Chad at a party. He looked empty. His eyes were cold, and his smile didn't reach them. Brittany was in a gossip column, complaining about a bad business deal. They had all the money in the world, all the things money can buy, but they were still miserable, still looking for something to fill a hole that could never be filled. Uncle Franklin was right. They got the mansions, the yachts, the cars, and they were still bankrupt. And me, I still have the toolbox. I cleaned it up a little, but I left the dents and the rust. It sits in my home office now, on a shelf where I can see it every day. It's no longer a symbol of my humiliation. It's a testament, a physical reminder that the world will try to label you, will try to tell you who you are, but only you get to decide that. It reminds me that sometimes the greatest treasures are disguised as junk, and the most valuable lessons come from the people who saw something in you no one else could. I'm no longer the man who was left with nothing. I'm a man who was trusted with everything. The truth is, my uncle gave me more than money. He gave me a purpose. He gave me a chance to prove my worth. He gave me the keys to my own kingdom, and that has made all the difference in the world. And that's my story. It's a story about family, about betrayal, and about finding out that your worth isn't measured by the things you own. It's a story about an underdog who won, not because he was lucky, but because he was ready. If you've ever felt like your voice wasn't heard, if you've ever felt like you were standing on the sidelines of your own life, then I hope this story gives you a little bit of hope. If you've got a story about someone who underestimated you, I want to hear it. Leave a comment below and share your story with our community. And if this story taught you anything about what real value in life means, do me a favor. Hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. The world is full of people who want to tell you you're worthless, but it's also full of stories about people who proved them wrong. If you want to hear more stories just like this, stories that will prove that anyone can win, no matter where they start, then subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Don't miss the next chapter of our journey.